In the past few months, news outlets have been left speechless.
A story that sounds straight out of the Netflix Narco. A notorious drug lord known for decapitating his victims is seemingly missing from
This guy's wearing a hairpiece. I see a seam right here, bro. I think this guy's wearing a hairpiece, man. It's a new day.
federal custody.
Notorious mob boss Edgar Valdez Villarreal has vanished into thin air, and this is what we know so far. Early life. You could argue that Edgar Valdez Villarreal had one of the most privileged upbringings of any members of the Sinaloa cartel. And there's something deeply disturbing about someone who did not need to venture into the murky worlds of criminality, but chose to anyway. For such an extraordinary criminal, his early life was incredibly ordinary. Edgar Valdez Villarreal was born in Laredo, Texas, and came from a Mexican family. He had a stereotypical suburban American upbringing. He was surrounded by his loving parents and played as a linebacker for the Laredo United High School football team. It was here where he was nicknamed La Barbie because his...
So he came up on this side. I didn't know that either. I didn't know he was an American football player.
His chiseled good looks resembled the Ken doll. He lived in a perfectly nice neighborhood. His brother became a successful businessman and his sister studied law. As a successful football player, he had a wealth of opportunities available to him. With a bright future ahead of him, he started to get into bad ways. During his teenage years, he began selling weed for some extra cash. He was also caught by police for drunk driving and public drunkenness. At age 18 and 2 months before graduation, he was arrested. The charge against him was homicide. He was speeding in a truck and he ran over a middle school counselor. However, he was never indicted for this. His father saw all the warning signs and offered to finance a college education for him, but he turned it down. Instead, Valdez chose the life that his immigrant parents tried to save him from, a life of crime. Initially, he was simply a marijuana dealer in his local area. At the age of 20, he was detained when found with 80 pounds of marijuana.
So he went across the border and put himself in the game. Ian said, I think Al Prophet did a video saying that Barbie was missing from federal prison, so people think he cooperated. Quite possible. He could be Nicky Barnes with a mask on. You know what I'm saying? Just testifying with a mask on. Well, he got out of there, but I think it's more likely that he ratted somebody out. Yeah, Barbie's probably wearing a mask, just testifying all over.
He faced a sentence of 7 years in prison, but the lenient judge instead gave him 5 years probation. At 22, he was also caught drunk driving, but only escaped with a fine. With his fair skin and Ken doll looks, he was always given the benefit of the doubt. As his business evolved, he branched out into selling cocaine, with a customer base primarily in New Orleans and Memphis. He was sometimes shipping as much as 150 to 180 kilograms of cocaine, and this cocaine was sold at $16,000 to $18,000 per kilogram. He was making a ton of money and loving life, known for driving flashy cars and socializing at bars and nightclubs. And of course, his Ken doll good looks made him a hit with the ladies too. But by the age of 24, he realized that the huge rewards that drug dealing brought also carried huge risks. A trusted worker turned out to be an informant, and an indictment was drawn up against him. This time around, it was unlikely that he would get the benefit of the doubt and definitely faced prison. He had to think fast. He lived in Laredo, Texas, but across the Rio Grande River in his town was Nuevo Laredo, Mexico. He traveled over to the city and back to his ancestral home of Mexico. Here, he started a new life, and his drug dealing career began to really take off.
He put himself in the game. He went across the way and put himself in the game.
Life south of the border. When La Barbie arrived in Mexico, he wasn't exactly a fish out of water. Through living in a Mexican family, he was of course fluent in Spanish and readily familiar with Mexican culture. And luckily for him, he knew the nephew of the head of the drug cartel in the area known as Los Chachos. For this trade, he paid $60,000 to the local plaza boss El Chacho, who in turn paid the bribes that ensured the trafficking routes. Valdez continued his job delivering drugs. He even transported cocaine from Colombia and other South American countries up to Mexico, with the hope of sending it across the US border. To avoid the authorities from catching him, he never stuck to the same route. He even transported drugs through motor vehicles, but he was also known to use speedboats and even airplanes. He also regularly bribed authorities too. During his time with El Chachos, he also bribed the officials to turn a blind eye to his drug dealing. Once again,
he did what everybody in that game does. Pay the officials to do what you need them to do, period.
He was making tons of money and loving life. But in the year 2000, a new mob was in town. The Gulf Cartel moved into Nuevo Laredo and gave members of the cartel two options: join or die. Valdez was one of the few people who told them he would rather choose the latter option. A deadly war was underway. The siege of Los Zetas. Valdez's new enemy was known as Los Zetas, a military arm of the Gulf Cartel and one of the most dangerous gangs ever known to exist. According to the BBC, the Zetas are known for their brutality, including including torturing and decapitating their victims. Los Zetas began burning down several residences owned by Los Chachos and killing many of their members. Valdez at this point felt that it was best to retreat. He continued to run his business but operated from the city of Monterrey further south. He also managed to bribe a local policeman named Jaime Valdez Martinez. Through this bribe, he could allow the smooth running of his business. It was this very police officer who introduced him to another important contact too. In this city, he would continue his drug dealing exploits and join a cartel known as ABL. This gang was named after its leader, Arturo Beltran Leyva, who was affiliated with the Sinaloa cartel. Valdez knew that this time around he needed an affiliation of this size to prevent someone from taking over his turf once again. Keen to strike up a friendship, Valdez noticed that Arturo Beltran Leyva had no horses on his ranch, so he bought him 3 horses as a gift, and it was the start of a formidable relationship. He had now cemented a bond with Arturo Beltran Leyva, who now promised El Barbie that he would help him take back.
Chucky said, so was La Barbie technically the biggest American supplier? He even made underboss. His numbers were high. Every border town has one. You know, whenever they say the twins, they like to say biggest in Chicago, but I want somebody to show me somebody bigger in the country.
Reclaiming Nuevo Laredo. With the backing of ABL and their wider backing from the Sinaloa cartel, Valdez could now take back the turf that was rightfully his. He secretly bought residences in Nuevo Laredo and had 200 men under his command. Los Zetas had enacted a surprise attack on his operations, and he attempted to do the exact same thing with them. It was time to fight fire with fire. Once he had the men secretly living in Nuevo Laredo, they ambushed members of Los Zetas. They killed and abducted many members and confiscated many of their properties. Once Los Zetas and the wider Gulf cartel found out about this, it was an all-out war once again. In the New York Times, they reported, the wave of killings that followed has turned into an all-out drug war that has spread to almost every corner of Mexico, leaving about 1,000 people dead since March 2003 and bringing...
Think about how many of the guys that made the least amount of money, least amount of impact on their lives, those are all the ones that got smoked. They were expendable. Crazy, crazy situation, a crazy pyramid scheme of power.
Harsh criticisms from Washington about the failure of President Vicente Fox's government to end it. Both sides were killing one another and did not make any significant territorial gains. It was at that point that La Barbie went nuclear and hired a paramilitary group as Los Negros to launch a full onslaught against Los Zetas. During this time, La Barbie brazenly posted a full-page ad in the Monterrey newspaper El Norte. He presented himself as a businessman and asked the president to sort out the violence and terror occurring in his area. I ask you to intervene to resolve the insecurity, extortion, and terror that exists in the state of Tamaulipas, and especially in the city of Nuevo Laredo. But later, in 2004, Valdez decided that staying in Nuevo Laredo was not safe enough. He decided to move out to Acapulco, but could continue the war from there. He soon enforced a security group for the Sinaloa cartel known as Los Negros. This was the Sinaloa cartel's answer to Los Zetas. Valdez was in charge of this hit squad that wiped out cartel members, organized kidnapping, and recruited more people to the cause. They even recruited police officers, military personnel, and federal agents. Both sides tried to outdo one another in just how brutal they could be. In December 2005, a video was picked up by Mexican and US news outlets. It showed 4 bloodied and bruised men who were believed to be members of Los Zetas. Towards the end of the video, one of the men was shot in the head. It's believed that this was in retaliation for Los Zetas killing his brother Armando Valdez Valdez, although it's unclear how and when. La Barbie may have recruited one of his own brothers into the drug dealing trade too. La Barbie's reputation. While this battle was raging on, La Barbie was becoming a bit of a celebrity. The Dallas Morning News described him as a 32-year-old ladies' man with a fondness for Versace clothes, luxury automobiles, and hobnobbing at top-drawer nightclubs. A Mexican businessman told the paper, he's a stud with a gun. He's one of those brooding guys who's like a magnet for all these women who think they can change him. This ABC News footage was equally as flattering.
Surrounded by millions of dollars, fancy cars, beautiful women, and living the good life in Mexico.
And his lifestyle even became the envy of his fellow Americans.
Some kids in Texas want to be just like him.
Guys like money, they get fame, they get girls, they get houses, they get everything they want.
But his celebrity status also caught the eyes of the US authorities, who realized that their runaway convict had become incredibly more dangerous. They had intelligence that he was still dealing and was spotted in Acapulco and working with the Beltran Leyvas. The US authorities issued a warrant for his arrest for cocaine smuggling. DEA Special Agent Steve Robertson, La Barbie, Edgar Valdez Villarreal, is a fugitive. He is a significant trafficker, and due to the fact that he's a lieutenant in one of the major kingpin organizations in Mexico, he's a big guy. We definitely want to get our hands on him. New leaders. By December 2006, President Felipe Calderón was elected into office with a clear mandate from the people of Mexico to crack down on violent drug gangs. 8 days after his election, Mexico had declared war against its own drug gangs and ordered more than 6,500 Mexican soldiers to the state of Michoacán to battle drug traffickers. They captured drug lord Osiel Cardena Cuyen, alleged
there's no lack of bodies willing to fall for this plight, bro. Like, just millions and millions of bodies on top of him.
Former head of the Gulf Cartel, who was extradited to the United States. For many drug lords now, the Mexican military was a bigger danger to the cartel than any other rival. By 2008, Arturo Beltran Leyva broke ties with the Sinaloa cartel and formed his own cartel, led by himself with La Barbie outlined as his long-term successor. At this time, La Barbie became Beltran Leyva's most trusted soldier and was their most brutal hitman. He was in charge of Fuerzas Armadas de Arturo, a group of assassins. But La Barbie was living a double life. He anonymously provided information about his enemies to the DEA and the FBI.
There it is. That you don't get away. You're not going to find one that isn't an informant. You're not going to find one that isn't an informant.
This was a common tactic by El Chapo, where he information about his enemies to the DEA. But La Barbie was living a double life. He anonymously provided information about his enemies to the DEA and the FBI. This was a common tactic by El Chapo, where he regularly gave information to the authorities in the hopes of taking his enemies down. He was also telling US officials about the corrupt officials of President Felipe Calderón. US court documents described him as a two-sided coin with the same face. It's also alleged that La Barbie was not only leaking information about his enemies, but also his own cartel, and what happened next supports this argument. In December 2009, President Felipe Calderón ordered 200 soldiers in a raid on a home in Cuernavaca, south of Mexico City. A series of guns and explosions were heard and the city was brought to its knees. 3 members of the cartel did not make it out alive, and one of those members was Arturo Beltran Leyva,
who died in a daring raid last week that also took the life of perhaps the country's
in the show they said it was Barbie that set him up. That's the same shit Whitey Bulger was doing. They're all doing it, man. If there's a dude from your hood that you know that be wildin', he'll never go to jail. Most of the time, reputations are built over that free pass. So Whitey Bulger's no different. Any of these guys, man, they can't win a war. They can't do this, they can't hit him that way. They say, all right, man, how are we gonna do this? We're gonna have to use that other gang against them boys.
Members was Arturo Beltran Leyva,
who died in a daring raid last week that also took the life of perhaps the country's most powerful drug kingpin, Arturo Beltran Leyva.
But the US government soon turned its back on La Barbie. They placed a $2.3 million bounty on his head. The person they let go 10 years ago was now one of their most wanted men. The hunt begins. With Arturo Beltran Leyva out of the picture, La Barbie assumed that this would make him the leader of the cartel. But things were not so simple. He now faced a battle for control of the cartel against Beltran Leyva's brother Hector. He was involved in a cartel civil war, who were involved in another cartel war, and there was a $2.3 million bounty on his head.
At what point do you stop and just get money? You can't. Which is why my argument was I couldn't believe that a couple of guys like the twins were able to manage their way through the game without having to leave bodies everywhere. You know what I'm saying? Because the game, look at what the game offers itself. A civil war within a civil war within a civil war. Like, at what point are you getting money? It's all just war, guerra. Like, yo, what point do you get to sit on the beach? You
Everyone
don't.
and anyone wanted him dead. During this time, La Barbie spent $200,000 on a movie about his own life. He decided not to release the movie as it obviously incriminated him and was more or less a confession of his crimes. In August 2010, La Barbie and his supporters were sent a chilling message.
Right, that's the ego, man. When it comes to, I want the movie about me while I'm still alive. Oops. I'm going to incriminate myself. That's the ego, man. That's a weakness. The ego was used against him. He made a movie. He realized, oh, I can't be putting movies out there. I'm telling on myself. Chapo, when old girl sent a couple of tweets and thought about the movie, that's the ego. The ego put these people in this position.
4 decapitated bodies were hung from a bridge in Cuernavaca. Alongside these bodies was a message of warning that anyone who supported La Barbie faced a similar fate. It was signed by Hector Beltran Leyva. Later that week, 2 more bodies were hung from a bridge in Acapulco. It was at this point that La Barbie fled the violence and sought refuge in Mexico City. But by Mexico City, I don't mean that he was simply wandering the streets. house up in the mountains was a hideout and somewhere he could lie low for the foreseeable future. Since he moved away from the other cartel's turf, they were less likely to go after him. But the US police did not care what part of the world he was in. As many as 1,200 law enforcement officers were involved in his case. After a year of searching, the US police circled a rustic mountain house in Salar, which was 200 miles from Mexico City. 6 guards were in the surrounding area, and they noticed that the phone signal was of no use, meaning that they would find it difficult to get backup. They barged into the home, and instead of an all-out war, LaBarbie and his guards surrendered. Deep down, he knew this day would come. LaBarbie was finally captured. Justice being served.
Mexican police officers, afraid to show their faces, paraded one of their most wanted and brutal drug lords.
The game was finally up. He was charged with transporting thousands of kilos of cocaine from Mexico to the US between 2004 and 2006. He regularly transported as much as a ton of cocaine a month from Mexico into the US. But as we all know, his crimes were much, much worse than simply dealing drugs. 2 years passed by, and the world had not heard much from LaBarbie. But in 2012, he decided to break his silence with an open letter. He decided to call out President Felipe Calderon. He stated Calderon wanted to forge agreements with all the cartels, Los Zetas cartel, the Gulf cartel, with me, the Juarez cartel.
With Vicente and Mayo and Chapo, the Sinaloa cartel. Do you believe that? Probably believe some of it. I wouldn't completely count out the government, not when I know that they've been in that game 70 years already.
With Vicente and Mayo and Chapo of the Sinaloa cartel. Since he did not receive a response from me, and because I did not want to have collaborations with any other criminal groups, Calderon initiated directed persecution against me. He ordered several searches of my homes without a legal warrant. They stole money, jewelry, cars.
That I'm
as well
sure
as
of. That I believe 100%. They stole money, jewelry, cars, as well as numerous other belongings. Absolutely, they came up off of the cartel. It's a cop somewhere in Mexico got some relics on his wall from the cartel homes.
Numerous other belongings. He then went on to list the number of government officials who received money from him. He wanted to put the word out that members of the Mexican government are supporters and enablers of the Mexican drug trade. I could easily have done what they do, but they, the Mexican government officials I mentioned, are also part of the criminal structure of this country. By 2015, LaBarbie was forced to finally come home. He was extradited to the US to face and be on US soil once again. He was transported alongside 13 other Mexican prisoners. In a courtroom the following year, he pled guilty to drug trafficking and money laundering. His extradition raised suspicions. Many thought that he was brought to the US so he could give information to the FBI and DEA, and thereby get a much more lenient sentence and an easier life in prison. Another reason is that the US simply didn't trust the Mexican prison system to contain its criminals. His defense attorney, Kent Schaefer, said, "I think the Mexican government finally released him now only because Chapo Guzman escaped. If one of these other guys escaped, it would be too damaging to the relationship with the US." In January of 2016, he pled guilty to these charges and was sentenced to 49 years in prison. He will be 94 by the time he reaches freedom, if ever. He was also ordered to forfeit $192 million, which was believed to be the amount of money he had earned selling cocaine. Prosecutor John Horn said, "Valdez's conviction is a victory for the people in both the United States and Mexico, whose lives were affected by his cocaine trafficking through drug addiction and community decay." The Crossroads. When his trial reached the media, the press was keen to get comments from the family. As we mentioned earlier, one of Valdez's sisters was looking to study law. By the time her brother was sentenced to prison, she was now a prosecutor. Both of them grew up in the same household, under the same family, but chose two entirely opposite paths. His sister asked for leniency in this case, and Judge William Duffy said, "Why are you a prosecutor, and why is your brother a seriously evil criminal?" Her response was that this was a question her family asks every day. Another brother of LaBarbie's named Abel has become a probation officer. Speaking about his brother, he said, "He chose that road, and we are a good family." The disappearance. But towards the end of 2022, strange events occurred. First of all, his name was no longer available on the Federal Bureau of Prisons website. A spokesperson for the Federal Bureau of Prisons said, "We can confirm this individual has not escaped from Bureau of Prisons custody. We do not provide specific information on the status of inmates who are not in the custody of the BOP for safety, security, or privacy reasons." Obviously, had he escaped, the police would alert the public that this dangerous man was out in the open. The Sinaloa cartel, and most famously El Chapo, are famous for breaking out of prisons, but these have been mostly Mexican prisons where the guards could be bribed. Escaping prisons in the US is not as easy. Prisoners can be removed, though, for more innocent reasons, such as if they are undergoing court hearings and medical treatments. And strangely enough, the Mexican government has not been informed as to what has happened either. Mexico's current president, Andrés Manuel López Obrador, said in a press conference, "It's very strange what is going on in the United States with Mr. Valdez, who is no longer registered among those in custody, and we want to know where he is. And there is no reason for him to leave prison because he was condemned to many many years, unless there was some kind of an agreement. El País reports that neither the Mexican Attorney General's office nor the Secretariat of Foreign Affairs knows where he is. Robert Almonte, a security consultant,
So nobody's accountable for that man's body, for his person? Yeah, he's probably got a mask on somewhere, testifying. And then they got to drop him off like in Poland or Norway or something where he could blend in, learn the language. Where's this guy at? What did the U.S. government offer him? And then for him to finally start talking and giving them information, it's like, what could they possibly offer him that's going to make things better? That's going to put him in a position to not be in jail for the rest of his life.
and former deputy chief of the Texas Police Department in El Paso, said he could be providing information on high-ranking cartel members, but even if this were the case, I can't see him being released from custody.
Right.
He added, he's very dangerous. He's
What they're going to give him, 70 years instead of life?
killed people, and he's extremely violent, and still has these connections to the cartels. At the same time, you can be removed from the database when you're being transported to another location. Perhaps LaBarbie has told the police that he's going to testify, and because of this is now unsafe in a regular prison. There may be other cartel members in this prison willing to kill him if he opens his mouth. Former acting ICE director Tom Homman told Fox News,
If I had a guess, educated guess at this, he's about ready to testify. He's about ready to testify probably against other cartel leaders and Mexican officials.
and that detail, that he is willing to testify against Mexican officials, is probably why they haven't told Mexico what is happening.
That's a very good one right there. If he's going to put the president on the chopping block and the secretary of defense and this person and that person, the minister of this, that, and the other, if he's going to put them on the hot seat, then they got to ghost him and disappear him. So he might be living next to you in a safe house. Probably just keeping them in the dark. Like, nah, bro, he going to rat y'all out. We're gonna
Some
keep
senior
him
members
safe
of the Mexican
from you.
police, military, and even the political establishment could be caught out, and coincidentally, an explosive trial is currently underway about a corrupt Mexican drug official, Garcia Luna. Garcia Luna, a disgraced government official, is accused of taking multi-million-dollar bribes from the Sinaloa cartel in exchange for impunity. It's alleged that the very person President Calderon hired to tackle the war on drugs was taking bribes from the very cartels he was supposed to be pursuing. Much like LaBarbie, he too could have been a two-sided coin with the same face. Prosecutor Philip Pilmer said the defendant took their money and betrayed his oath to his country. The person who was supposed to be in charge of fighting against the Sinaloa cartel was actually its most valuable asset. And this neatly brings us back to LaBarbie's 2012 letter from prison.
Of course, it's all the way up the ladder. It's in the courtroom, in the chambers of justice. All crooked.
Mentioning him by name, he said, Genaro Garcia Luna, head of the Federal Public Security Secretariat since at least 2002, first in the AFI and then in the PFP, received money from me in various occasions as a result of drug trafficking and having knowledge it was coming from organized crime. The broader points. LaBarbie's life is an example of how our lives can go down different paths. He became one of the most notorious drug dealers Mexico has ever seen, whereas his own sister went to law school and became a prosecutor. His cooperation with US officials and the US's failure to tell Mexico why he has disappeared raises an interesting point too. Does the US trust the Mexican government to sort out its drug war? Or, in this case, what's being alleged, are they also part of the problem too? With a hefty prison
They're
sentence
part of the problem too.
in front of him, LaBarbie has nothing to lose. He could be lifting the lid on some truly earth-shattering information. Thank you so much for watching. Please click on some of the videos in front of you for more. See you there.
He's probably going out with a bang, man. He's like, all right, I'm taking everybody with me.